The sharp crack of a palm against a cheek echoed through the courthouse. Margaret Wilson stood unflinching, her silver wig slightly askew, as her daughter-in-law's handprint bloomed red across her face. The courtroom fell silent. "You've ruined everything," Rebecca Wilson hissed, her perfectly manicured nails curled into fists. Margaret adjusted her glasses calmly, looking directly into the eyes of the young woman who had once promised to love her son forever. "No, dear, you did that yourself." The slap from my daughter-in-law didn't just knock my glasses aside, it shattered 35 years of illusions about my family. As I stood in that courtroom facing the consequences of my choice to stand up for myself, I couldn't help but remember how it all began 3 months ago on what should have been the happiest day of my son's life. I jolted awake at dawn on David's wedding day, disoriented by a strange burning sensation across my scalp. My hand instinctively reached up, expecting to touch the silver hair I had meticulously cared for all these years. Instead, my fingers met smooth, burning skin. The sharp smell of antiseptic hung in the air. For a moment, I couldn't process what had happened. Then my gaze fell upon a small note card placed carefully on my nightstand. The elegant blue handwriting was immediately recognizable as Rebecca's. "Finally, a hairstyle that matches your age. Enjoy my wedding day." I didn't scream. I didn't call out. Something cold and calculating took over as I walked to the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back wasn't Margaret Wilson, the respected African-American real estate developer who had built a small empire in Boston. She was someone humiliated to the core. My pride, my thick silver hair that I'd cared for so meticulously all these years, a crown many black women my age worked hard to maintain, was gone. All that remained was a slick, burning, dark scalp. What would you do if a family member treated you this way? I made my way to the wall safe hidden behind a painting of Boston Harbor at sunset. My fingers turned the dial with practiced precision. Inside lay an envelope containing transfer documents for $22 million in assets and property. The wedding gift I had spent weeks preparing, believing it would be the final bridge to keep my son close. Now, when my fingers touched that envelope, it felt different. The paper wasn't smooth anymore. It felt sharp, like a blade cutting into my palm. I gripped it, then placed it back in the safe, turned the dial, and listened to the dry metal click. The decision was made. That gift would never leave this safe. I was 33 when my world collapsed the first time. They handed me my husband Robert's death certificate one Tuesday afternoon. Sudden heart attack on the highway. In one moment, we were discussing expanding our small real estate office. In the next, I was frozen in a hospital corridor, hands pressed against my face, hearing my 12-year-old son ask, "Mom, where's Dad?" I had no answer. I pulled David close, held him tightly, and silently swore he would never lack for anything. That night, we returned to our modest house outside Boston. I sat in an old armchair for hours, watching David asleep on the sofa, his young face still streaked with tears. That night, my tears fell on unpaid bills, but my hands never trembled as I planned our future. In the dark, I understood that from now on, the weight was mine alone. No Robert to split bills, no shoulder to lean on, just me and a boy who didn't yet know how to knot his school tie. The next morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, I put on a thin sweater, tied my hair back, and began my new role as a widowed mother turned accidental businesswoman. I had no capital, no specialized knowledge, but I had one driving force I had to survive. I spent hours at the public library studying real estate property management and market analysis. At first, the numbers spun in my head, but page by page, I understood that knowledge would be the sharp knife protecting us from poverty. Those first years were brutal. I worked from 5 in the morning until late at night. Days were spent knocking on doors of tired old houses pitching low-cost brokerage services. Nights were dedicated to studying market trends and cold-calling potential clients. Some evenings I cried after another rejection, then rose at dawn to make David breakfast and drive him to school. I went hungry many days to save for his math books. When he asked, "Mom, why aren't you eating with me?" I smiled reassuringly. "I already ate. You go ahead." He believed me, and I worked even harder. I wanted him to grow up feeling secure, not like me as a child digging through empty cupboards for the last stale roll. 3 years after Robert's death, I bought my first duplex property. I remember signing the papers, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. When I put it down, a new door opened in our lives. From there, it was brick by brick, unit by unit. The Wilson real estate footprint started with freezing morning walks to broker offices, hoarse throat calls, and nights lit by a desk lamp over burning eyes. David's experience was entirely different. He saw the results, not the process. At 18, he was accustomed to a new car-paid tuition, never thinking twice about the price of a shirt. I'd raised him like a prince, but forgot to teach the prince how to wield a sword. On his college graduation day, I watched him stride across the stage robe, billowing in the spring breeze. I thought I'd done it, transformed a fatherless boy into a successful man, but deep in his eyes I saw something I recognized. Not gratitude, entitlement. While my hands cracked from painting the walls of our first apartment building, David demanded a sports car for his 18th birthday. I was sorting through old files 5 years ago when I found something disturbing. A transfer document for a small condo downtown with my signature on it, but I had no memory of signing such papers. The date coincided with a period when I had been recovering from minor surgery, heavily medicated for pain. David had brought me routine paperwork to sign. I trusted my son completely then. Now, looking at the document with clear eyes, I realized he had deceived me. He had taken advantage of my vulnerable state to secure property for himself. I confronted him that evening. His response still rings in my ears. "Mom, you would have given it to me anyway. I just didn't want to stress you while you were recovering." I let it go. The property wasn't significant in my portfolio, and I told myself he was right. I would have given it to him eventually. But something shifted in our relationship that day. A small crack formed in the foundation of trust I thought was unshakable. When David turned 35, he brought home Rebecca Harris. She was 30, a marketing specialist with perfect posture and a calculated smile. Her designer clothes and immaculate appearance spoke of ambition and polish. When our eyes first met, I saw the quick assessment in her gaze as she took in my home, my clothes, my worth. At our first dinner together, Rebecca's true nature revealed itself in subtle jabs. "Mrs. Wilson, this house has such a vintage charm. We should renovate it to increase the resale value. That silver brooch looks so traditional. Is it a family heirloom?" Each comment carried the same message. "You are old, your tastes are outdated, and everything you have should eventually be mine." David sat beside her, nodding along, transformed into her shadow. The boy I'd sacrificed everything for now looked at me through someone else's eyes. I learned later that Rebecca grew up in a middle-class family, but harbored an obsession with social status. Her father worked at a bank, but never rose above middle management. Her mother taught piano lessons from their modest home. Rebecca had clawed her way into Boston's social circles through sheer determination and careful image cultivation. This explained her attraction to David, not for who he was, but for what he stood to inherit. More telling was her relationship history. Rebecca had been briefly engaged to the son of a prominent Boston family 2 years before meeting David. That engagement mysteriously ended after the family lost a significant portion of their wealth in a failed business venture. Within months, she had moved on to a successful hedge fund manager until he too experienced financial setbacks. Her pattern was clear. She followed the money, and now she had her sights set on my fortune. The past 5 years have brought significant changes to our family dynamic. I've watched my only child drift further away under Rebecca's influence. What began as occasional dismissive comments has evolved into a systematic campaign to distance David from me. Let me bring you up to date on where things stand so far. David and Rebecca have been together for 5 years. Their relationship progressed quickly, and my son seemed captivated by her confidence and ambition. For my part, I maintained a polite facade, hoping that time would soften the edges between us. Instead, the tension has only grown. David stopped visiting for our weekly Sunday dinners shortly after Rebecca moved in with him. Our conversations became increasingly centered around financial matters. requests for investments in various business ventures, hints about upgrading to a larger home, questions about my retirement plans. My son, who once shared his dreams and fears with me, now spoke primarily in terms of assets and opportunities. So what happens next? What new challenge will test the bonds between mother and son? I was in the garden when I overheard Rebecca on her phone. She stood by the pool, unaware of my presence behind the hedge. "The wedding is our best chance," she said in a hushed tone. "Once we're officially family, we'll have more leverage to convince her about Silver Meadows. David is already on board." Silver Meadows. The name sent a chill through me. It was an assisted living facility across town, known more for its low costs than quality care. Was this their plan to ship me off to a home after the wedding? As Rebecca continued her call, I remained hidden, my heart pounding. "The old lady is worth over $20 million. David says she's planning some big gesture for the wedding. We just need to play nice until then." That evening, I called my longtime friend and former attorney, Grace Chen. At 70, Grace had retired from her legal practice, but maintained a sharp mind and fierce protective instinct. "Come over," she said simply when I explained what I'd overheard. Grace lived 3 houses down in a restored Victorian with a wraparound porch. Her husband had passed 2 years before, and she now lived alone, surrounded by books and memories. "Margaret," she said, as we settled in her sunroom, "I've seen this happen too many times in my career, adult children and their spouses eyeing the assets of aging parents. But David wouldn't—" I started, then stopped. Would he? The memory of the condo paperwork surfaced again. Grace sipped her tea. "People surprise us, especially when money is involved. Tell me more about this, Rebecca." I described the subtle digs, the way she influenced David the phone conversation. "You need to protect yourself," Grace concluded, "both legally and personally." "The wedding is in 3 weeks," I said. "I've been preparing a significant gift, $22 million in property and investments." Grace nearly choked on her tea. "Margaret, that's excessive even for a mother's generosity." I sighed. I thought it might strengthen our relationship, give them a solid start. "Or give them exactly what they want without any need to maintain a relationship with you afterward," Grace countered. The truth of her words stung. What should I do? "First, secure your assets. Meet with Richard Grant. He's the best elder law attorney in Boston. Second, document everything. Record conversations if Massachusetts law allows it. And third, don't sign anything no matter how insignificant it seems." When I returned home that evening, the house was quiet. David had moved out years ago but visited regularly, especially since the engagement. I went to my study and pulled out the wedding gift documents. The papers represented decades of work, sacrifice, and planning. I had imagined David and Rebecca's gratitude, perhaps a renewed closeness in our family. Now those papers felt like the bait in an elaborate trap. When a gift becomes a knife, it's time to reconsider the giving, I whispered to myself. The wedding gift was no longer a bridge to connection. It had become a double-edged sword, one side to protect the other, to strike back. The next morning I met with Richard Grant, a distinguished 65-year-old attorney with silver hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. "Ms. Wilson, your concern is unfortunately common," he said after hearing my story. "The financial exploitation of older adults is America's hidden epidemic, especially by family members." "What can I do?" I asked. "First, let's review your current estate plan." As we went through my documents, Richard frowned. "There are several concerning elements here. When was the last time you updated this will?" "About 2 years ago. David recommended a new estate attorney." Richard's eyebrows rose. "Did you select this attorney independently?" I shook my head slowly as understanding dawned. "David introduced us. A thorough examination revealed subtle but significant issues designed to give David, and by extension Rebecca, extraordinary control over my assets should I be deemed incapacitated by a medical professional with a very low threshold for what constituted incapacity." "This is predatory," Richard concluded. "We need to draft new documents immediately." As we worked through proper protections, Richard explained how financial exploitation often progresses. First isolation from friends and support systems, then creating dependency, suggesting cognitive decline, and finally taking control of finances. The concerning part is you've already experienced several of these steps, he explained. The suggestions about your memory, the comments about assisted living, the legal groundwork. I left his office with a new estate plan and a heavy heart. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. My own son, the boy I'd gone hungry for, was part of a scheme to strip me of my dignity and assets. The wedding preparations continued. I maintained my composure, playing the role of the excited mother of the groom. No one suspected the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. A week before the wedding, David and Rebecca came for dinner. Rebecca was particularly solicitous, asking about my health, commenting on how tired I looked. "Mom, have you been taking your blood pressure medication?" David asked, concern etched on his face. I had no blood pressure issues. Never had. "Of course, dear," I replied, watching their exchange of glances. "Perhaps we should have Dr. Thompson stop by," Rebecca suggested, "just for a quick check." "Who is Dr. Thompson?" I asked innocently. "A wonderful geriatric specialist," Rebecca answered. "He consults for Silver Meadows. Such a lovely facility. We should tour it sometime." I smiled. "That won't be necessary. My annual physical is next month with Dr. Lieberman, as always." The look of frustration that flashed across Rebecca's face was quickly masked. "It's always good to get a second opinion, especially at your age." I changed the subject, but the trap was clear. They were laying groundwork suggesting cognitive or physical decline to justify later actions. That night, I couldn't sleep. The weight of betrayal pressed on my chest like a stone. I'd spent 35 years building a life and legacy for my son, only to become an obstacle in his path. The irony was bitter. The night before the wedding, I overheard David on the phone in the guest room. I had stopped by to deliver fresh towels, but paused at the door when I heard the urgency in his voice. "Vanessa, no. Don't show up tomorrow." "I told you, wait until after the ceremony," David said, his voice tense and low. Vanessa. Who was Vanessa? "After I get that money from my mother, everything will change. We won't have to hide anymore. Just be patient a little longer." I froze, the towels clutched against my chest. "You know how my mother is. She always wants to please me. Always afraid I'll go without. As soon as she signs tomorrow afternoon, we'll have it all. A fresh start. Freedom." The towels slipped from my hands. David wasn't just part of Rebecca's scheme. He had his own betrayal in play, a lover waiting in the wings for my money to finance their escape. I retreated silently, my mind racing. The double betrayal was almost too much to comprehend. Rebecca planned to discard me in a care home and eventually divorce David. David planned to take my money and run off with another woman, and I was the unwitting bank for both their schemes. I returned to my bedroom and called Lucy, my hairstylist of over 20 years. My voice trembled slightly as I explained what had happened to my hair. "I need you right now. Bring the best wig you have. No one can know." Lucy didn't pry. She simply whispered, "I'll be there in 20 minutes." While I waited, I sat in the armchair by the window and looked out at the yard under the first light of dawn. White blossoms from the apple tree drifted down, covering the brick path I'd walked thousands of times. Memories crashed in like waves. The day I became a widow at 33, the night I buried my husband with 12-year-old David asleep in my arms, and the vow I made that he would never know fear or hunger. I kept that promise for 3 decades. I worked without stopping. Dawn runs from job sites to the office, late nights reading contracts until my eyes blurred. Every brick, every contract tied to my blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. And now all of it stood to fall into the hands of people who saw me as disposable. Lucy arrived discreetly through the garden entrance. When she saw my head, she covered her mouth in shock. "Oh my God, Margaret!" I cut off her pity with a tight smile. "Don't ask. Just help me stand tall in front of people today." It took nearly an hour to fit a soft silver-gray wig designed specifically for black women's hair textures. When Lucy held up the mirror, I shivered. The woman in the glass was no longer the wreck from earlier that morning. Lucy, also a woman of color, had understood exactly what this violation meant in our culture, where hair carries such profound significance. I recognized her, Margaret Wilson, the woman who never accepted defeat. I thanked Lucy, slipped a thick envelope into her hand, and walked her out. Alone again, I opened my purse and carefully tucked in a small voice recorder. My instincts told me that today, words without proof would save no one. The clock read 10:00 a.m., 3 hours until the ceremony at St. Andrew's Church, one of Boston's oldest and most beautiful houses of worship. I closed my eyes and drew a deep breath. The battle had started the second my hand touched that bare scalp this morning, but the ending would be mine to decide. I grabbed a gray wool coat and a cashmere scarf David had given me years ago. That memory now felt like a dull knife scratching at my heart. I told myself, "Son, today, I'll show you just how badly you misjudged your mother." When I stepped outside, Boston's spring wind slapped my face, but I didn't flinch. I pulled the collar up, adjusted the wig, and got into the waiting car. My driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, ready to speak. I shook my head. I needed silence. I needed to feed the fire that had just been lit. On the way to the church, I watched people through the window, couples holding hands, families guiding small children across streets. I wondered how many of them had been betrayed by the very people they trusted most, how many had been forced to choose between love and self-respect. I knew today I wasn't fighting only for myself, but for countless mothers used by their own children with motherhood thrown back at them as a demand. The car stopped at the church gates. I pressed a hand to my chest and felt a strange calm, not trembling weakness, but strength rising. The strength of truth, of a woman pushed to the edge who refused to break. I opened the door, stepped out, and smiled. That smile wasn't for the crowd or for David or Rebecca. It was for me. Margaret Wilson, who woke up on the most important morning of her life with a shaved head and a heart more awake than ever. I sat on the cold pew looking up at the stained glass windows flickering with colored light. While the staff rushed flowers and candles into place, my mind drifted back to where it all began. Love, loss, and the grit to build a life from nothing. The church began to fill with guests. I nodded and smiled, the perfect picture of maternal pride. Inside, I was calculating my next moves with the precision that had built my business empire. I slipped away to the restroom, needing a moment alone. As I passed the bridal suite, I heard Rebecca's voice high with excitement. "Just a few more hours and we'll have it all. 22 million, and by law I get half." I stopped, pressing myself against the wall. "David's so naive," she continued, her voice lower now. "He has no idea I've already contacted an attorney. I don't need to stay with him forever. With that money, I can start fresh, freer, and more comfortable." A bridesmaid giggled. "What about the mother-in-law? She's a handful, acts like the house is hers." "Don't worry," Rebecca replied, her tone ice cold. "Once the money's in, I'll push David to put her in Silver Meadows, park her there. Let someone else handle her. Once she's out of the picture, she won't have a say in anything." The room erupted in shrill laughter. I stood frozen, the recorder in my purse capturing every word, every bitter laugh. I eased away without a sound. My heart hammered, but my steps remained steady. If I stayed 1 minute longer, I might charge in and scream in Rebecca's face. Instead, I retreated to gather myself. Back in the sanctuary, guests continued to arrive. I smiled and greeted them, burying the storm twisting inside me. In the colored glass reflection, I caught sight of myself, a silver-haired woman in a navy dress, deep red lipstick perfectly applied. No one knew that just steps away I'd heard my future daughter-in-law call me an old woman who needed to be locked away. I sat with my hands loosely folded in my lap. Inside my purse, the recording had become living proof. I pictured playing it for the crowd, Rebecca's smug laughter echoing, her face paling as she realized everything was exposed. The thought gave me an odd, cooling calm. Rebecca wanted me erased, tucked away in some distant nursing home. David wanted to drain my money and run with his lover. Both thought I was week-old, easily beaten, but that contempt would be their undoing. I would turn their trap into my launch pad. From the shaved scalp, the spiteful note, the false vows I'd overheard, to the vicious laughter in the bridal room together, they had created an indictment I didn't need to add a single word to. All I had to do was wait for the right moment. I drew a deep breath and looked toward the altar where candles washed the Virgin Mary's face in golden light. Quietly, I told myself, they think I've lost. They have no idea I've just begun. I straightened my shawl, sat tall, and let a gentle smile return to my face. Anyone passing by would see only a kind, proud mother of the groom on his special day. But behind that smile, a blade was ready, and when I drew it, none of them would see it coming. The church bells pealed, each round tone rolling through the space like a familiar refrain. Guests took their seats. White draped pews were decorated with deep red roses and ivory ribbons, elegant and traditional, just as Rebecca had wanted. I sat in the front row on the groom's side, fingers lightly holding the small clutch on my lap. All eyes turned to the back where Rebecca was about to enter on her father's arm. The large wooden doors opened, and she appeared in a French lace gown, the train nearly touching the stone steps. Murmurs and gasps spread through the congregation. Camera flashes popped like distant lightning. Rebecca beamed, gliding forward like the heroine in a fairy tale. I watched her and couldn't help recalling the cruel words from the dressing room minutes ago. Behind that shimmer of white was a calculating heart, and I was the only one here who knew it. David waited at the end of the aisle, handsome in a black tuxedo with a crisp white tie. His smile was wide, but to me it was nothing more than a mask. I heard his whisper on the phone in my head, "After I get that money from my mother, everything will change." The image of the boy who once gripped my hand on toddler legs, afraid to walk alone, was gone. In front of me stood a man who had sold his conscience and kinship for a promise of freedom. The ceremony began. The priest's opening words were steady and solemn, echoing under the high vaulted ceiling. Marriage is a sacred union. Every word landed like a taunt. I glanced around at the teary eyes, the tender smiles, the people certain they were witnessing true love. Only I knew they were watching an elaborate production. When it came time for the vows, David turned to Rebecca, his voice low and steady. "I promise to love you, respect you, share every joy and sorrow, and be by your side for life." I bit my lip and listened, every word carved into the morning's memory like a blade. He promised fidelity, yet hours earlier he'd been whispering to another woman. He promised a future together while planning to leave his bride once he got my money. Then it was Rebecca's turn. She lifted her face, eyes shining as if full of love. "I promise to stand by you, care for you, face every challenge together, and keep this love forever." I almost laughed. Her vows were pretty as poetry, but in my head, I still heard the chill of her words. "I've already contacted an attorney. After that, the mother-in-law goes to a nursing home." When the priest asked, "Does anyone object to this marriage?" I felt a momentary urge to stand and shout that the whole ceremony was a lie. Instead, I clenched my hands and held my peace. Not yet. The trap I'd set needed time, and this big audience was exactly the witness I needed when the truth came out. Finally, the bells rang bright, and the priest declared them husband and wife. David leaned down to kiss Rebecca, and the church burst into applause. I clapped too slow and firm, smiling the whole time. On the outside, I looked like any proud mother. Inside, I knew that everything I'd just witnessed was an empty performance. As the couple turned to walk back down the aisle to cheerful music, I rose and followed with the other guests. My eyes remained fixed on the white train and glossy tuxedo. They thought they'd already won, that I was just a mother pushed aside. But I knew this. The more perfect this ceremony appeared, the harder their fall would be. I brushed my hand over my purse where the recorder was safely hidden. The evidence was enough to expose it all. I pictured David's face when he realized he'd been found out, Rebecca's panic when she heard her own voice ring out before the crowd. A strange calm settled over me as we moved toward the reception. People poured out of the church toward the lavishly decorated hall next door. White flowers stretched everywhere, champagne sparkled in crystal glasses, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Guests laughed and toasted, raising their glasses in celebration. I moved among them, composed and smiling as I greeted familiar faces. No one saw that behind my calm mask I was holding a storm ready to break at the perfect moment. In my head, every step was set. I'd wait until the room gathered together, until all eyes were on the head table, until everyone lifted their glasses to hear me speak. Then the lies would be dragged into the light and no one could deny them. I took my seat at the front table under warm, golden lights and quietly watched David and Rebecca sit side by side, holding hands, smiling at guests. Their display moved many people. To me, it was makeup and masks covering rot. I breathed slow and deep and told myself, let them enjoy their last moments of glory. After that, the stage is mine. The reception hall glittered under crystal chandeliers. White orchids cascaded from centerpieces, and champagne flowed freely. The perfect celebration for a perfect couple. I watched David and Rebecca accept congratulations, their smiles never wavering. Such talented actors, both of them. I sat at my place of honor, the mother of the groom appearing properly proud, while my fingers remained wrapped around my purse. Inside the small recorder held truth sharper than any knife. I didn't rush. A lifetime in real estate had taught me timing was everything. The right moment would present itself. Rebecca's father raised his glass for the first toast. A bank executive with silver temples and practiced charm, he spoke of family bonds and new beginnings. I studied his face, wondering if he knew his daughter's true character. Judging by the genuine emotion in his eyes, he did not. Another victim of an elaborate performance. Next came David's best friend from college, sharing stories of their youth carefully edited for the occasion. Then Rebecca's maid of honor, her cousin from Connecticut, waxing poetic about finding true love. Each speaker added another layer to the beautiful lie. The MC gently tapped his microphone. And now please welcome Margaret, mother of the groom, to share a few words on this special day. A hush fell over the crowd. Heads turned. Expectant eyes landed on me. This was my moment. I rose slowly, lifted a glass of champagne, and stepped to the microphone. My heart tightened for a beat, then steadied. I had rehearsed this moment since I walked into the ceremony, my words carefully chosen. First, thank you all for being here to celebrate with our family. For me, this moment holds special significance because I get to see my son step into a new chapter of his life. Applause rippled through the room. I paused, took a small sip, set the glass down. My voice dropped slow but clear. For 35 years, I've lived by a promise. Since my husband passed away, I swore I would protect David with everything I had, give my son a full life, and never let him face the want I once knew. A few soft murmurs rose from nearby tables. Some older guests nodded warm-eyed. And today I plan to give my son and his new wife a wedding gift, a substantial one, $22 million, the savings of my lifetime, the result of decades of work. The room stirred, surprised whispers, a few gasps. David squeezed Rebecca's hand, his face tightening slightly as he forced a smile. Rebecca's eyes lit up her lips, curling upward in anticipation. I drew a deep breath, lifted my head, and shifted my tone. But there's something life has taught me. Not every sacrifice is valued, and not everyone deserves the gift you give. The air in the room changed. Curious looks turned toward me. David leaned forward, ready to speak, but I raised a hand to stop him. I pulled the small recorder from my purse and set it on the table. The red light blinked steadily. Before I decide, I think everyone should hear a few truths. Silence fell. I pressed play. David's voice filled the quiet room. After I get that money from my mother, everything will change. We won't have to hide anymore. Just be patient a little longer. The audio was so clear that a few mouths fell open. David blanched. He cut in, voice tight. Mom, this is a misunderstanding. I looked him straight in the eye, calm but firm. A misunderstanding. Then where did these words come from? Whose mouth, David? Noise rose as guests whispered to each other. Rebecca looked at her husband, eyes wide with alarm, then tried to cover with a stiff smile. I didn't give them time to recover. I hit the next clip. You know how my mother is. She always wants to please me. As soon as she signs this afternoon, we'll have it all. A fresh start. Freedom. No strings. When it ended, the room erupted like a kicked beehive. David sprang up, stammering. It was just a joke. Don't take it the wrong way. I narrowed my eyes, cutting through his feeble excuse. A joke. Joking about betraying a marriage. Joking about treating your mother like a wallet. David went silent, sweat beading on his forehead. Rebecca tried to hold his hand, but he pulled away. His gaze dropped to the floor. I turned, fixing my eyes on Rebecca. And Rebecca, you have something to explain too. I pulled the small note from my purse, the nasty line I found on my pillow that morning. Congratulations, you finally have a hairstyle that matches your age. Enjoy my wedding day. I held it up for the nearest tables to see. You plan to erase me from this celebration by shaving my head in my sleep, a cheap, degrading stunt? Rebecca shot up, face flaming. That's not mine. You're making this up. I smiled coolly. Really? Then why did you brag in the bridal room that you'd divorce in a few months and take half the money? I heard everything. And I have witnesses if needed. The room froze. Some guests glanced at each other. Others whispered into their phones, clearly recording this unexpected turn of events. Rebecca's face went white, her lips trembling without sound. I let the silence stretch, then slowly raised my glass again. So, I'm canceling the $22 million gift. Neither of you deserves a penny of the money I earned with blood and tears. Conversation crashed like a wave. David collapsed into his chair, head down, hand over his face. Rebecca stood rigid, shaking with rage or shock, I couldn't tell which. I ended in a level voice that carried across the silent room. The greatest wedding gift I can give today is the truth. And the truth is this greed and betrayal never win. I set the glass down and turned to leave. Chairs, scraped voices rose. A few shocked exclamations rang out behind me, but my steps were light and steady. I was no longer the woman trembling in the mirror this morning. I was the one who stripped the masks off my son and daughter-in-law in front of everyone. In that moment, I knew I'd taken back control, and the game from here on out had only just begun. I left the hall with my back straight, neither rushing nor hesitating. Each step tapped evenly on the tile like a reminder that the weight had lifted from my shoulders. Behind me, chaos still rolled through the reception hall. Chairs dragged across the floor, people called out to each other, the sounds of a wedding turned storm. I had just reached the lobby when I heard hurried footsteps. David rushed up and grabbed my arm. The handsome groom's polish was gone, replaced by panic and bloodshot eyes. "Mom, please don't do this. You misunderstood." I turned and met his eyes, the eyes that once made me proud, now filled with desperation. I pulled my arm free, my voice low but firm. "I've heard enough, David. There's no misunderstanding." He stammered, searching for an excuse. I only said that to test her. I never meant—" "Enough." I cut him off, my voice ringing through the wide lobby. "Don't turn betrayal into a joke. I gave my whole life for you, and this is how you repay me." David froze his mouth, working, but no words coming out. His face twisted, anger and despair tangled together. Then, as if giving up, he dropped to his knees, hands clutching his head, and whispered, I was wrong." I didn't answer. I gave him one final look and turned away. Right then, Rebecca burst out of the reception hall, her puffed wedding dress slowing her down, but she still lunged forward. Her face had gone pale, her makeup starting to smear crimson lips, trembling with rage. She shrieked, voice shrill, "You made that up! You ruined my wedding!" Her scream drew curious guests outside. I stood calmly watching her snarl like a cornered animal. "Ruined it." I curled a cold smile. "I only told the truth. You should thank me for showing everyone your real face sooner." Rebecca lunged, trying to snatch the recorder from my hand, but an older male guest held her back just in time. His voice was hard. "Rebecca, calm down. We all heard it. How are you going to deny it?" She broke down, sobbing, mascara streaking her cheeks, all her earlier haughtiness gone. In the chaos, I saw her parents step outside. They didn't go to their daughter. They stood frozen at the door, eyes full of disappointment. Her father lowered his head, and her mother kept shaking hers, as if witnessing the worst humiliation of their lives. By then, David had gotten up gaunt and sharp-faced and snapped at Rebecca. "You betrayed me too." She turned back, choking up. I just wanted a better future. Her weak excuses sank under the guests' angry whispers. Some shook their heads, others walked off without a backward glance. I looked at the two of them, and a feeling I couldn't name rose in me. Not joy, not gloating, just relief. Relief that the truth was finally out. I took a few more steps toward the exit. Behind me, David ran after me again. This time, his voice not frantic but desperate. "Mom, please don't abandon me. I know I was wrong. Please give me one more chance. I'll change." I stopped, turned my back to him so he couldn't see the tears on my cheeks. Then I answered slow but firm, "David, I've given you chances your whole life. You chose to throw them all away. Now you have to live with the consequences." I didn't wait for his reply. I kept walking, leaving behind the choking sobs of my only son. Outside the hall, the decorated cars still lined up, flowers still bright, but no one wanted photos anymore. Guests drifted off the air, heavy like smoke clinging to the walls. I could feel it. This dream wedding had collapsed in just a few minutes. An old friend, Helen, hurried after me and took my hand. She whispered, "Margaret, you did the right thing. They needed to be exposed." I nodded lightly and said nothing more. Back in the car, I settled into the back seat and looked through the window. In a final glimpse, I saw David standing stunned in the lobby while Rebecca sobbed and shoved at people trying to comfort her. The scene looked like a warped painting of wedding bliss. I closed my eyes and told myself that today's storm was only the beginning. I knew the aftershocks would keep coming. They would come to me begging or raging, but I was ready now. I wasn't the soft mother anymore. I was Margaret Wilson, and I had decided to step out of the spiral of lies. The next morning, I woke as pale sunlight slipped through my bedroom curtains. No more wedding clamor, no more of David's breathless pleading or Rebecca's furious wailing, only quiet. And inside me, a resolve clearer than ever. I brewed coffee and poured it into my favorite china mug with a rose print. As the warm scent filled the kitchen, I sat down and pulled out an old notebook filled with financial plans and figures. I had once treated these pages as proof of a lifetime of sacrifice for family. But today I took a red pen and crossed out every line, every allocation for David. In that moment, I realized that money, no matter how much, turns into a weapon against you when you give it to the wrong person. I had raised a dependent man who never learned to stand on his own, and now he had tried to sell out his own mother for a false promise of freedom. That painful truth had finally awakened me, and I knew I had to act before it was too late. I called Richard Grant, who sounded surprised at a Sunday morning call. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilson. I thought you'd be resting after yesterday's events." "Yesterday was memorable to say the least," I replied. "And because of it, I want to see you today. We need to change my entire will and all transfer documents. No delays." He was quiet for a moment, then answered firmly, "I'll head to the office now. Can you meet me at 10:00? I agreed, feeling lighter, as if a stone had been lifted off my chest. Richard's law office sat in a red brick building downtown, about 15 minutes from my house. When I walked in, he was already seated, silver frames perched on his nose, a thick file set neatly on the desk. He looked at me with sympathetic eyes. "I've heard about what happened at the ceremony. Sounds like you faced quite a situation." I let out a long breath, then gave him a brief account of everything: the shaved head, the nasty note, David's phone call to his lover, Rebecca's venom in the bridal room. Richard listened without interrupting, only nodding occasionally. When I finished, he closed the file and looked at me, his face grave. "I understand, and you were right to call me. First order of business is the will. David will no longer be an heir. Do you want to leave anything to any other family member?" I shook my head firmly. "No, I want everything moved to a charity fund supporting widows and single mothers starting businesses. They truly know the value of money, and they need it to rebuild." Richard jotted notes quickly, then asked, What about the trust you set up for David? Terminate it, I said without hesitation. I want to shut off every pipeline. Not a single dollar goes to him or Rebecca. Over the next 3 hours, we combed through every contract and clause. I signed the new pages feeling like I was closing an old door and opening a brighter one. Each stroke of the pen was a cut severing David's dependence on me. When I signed the last document, I leaned back and took a deep breath. I felt released, as if my blood finally flowed freely after years of being constricted. Richard gave me a small smile. I know this wasn't easy, but sometimes freedom comes from drawing a hard line. Mrs. Wilson, you just did the most important thing for the rest of your life. I nodded, gratitude filling me. Back home, I walked into the living room and looked around at the paintings on the walls and the family photos from when David was little. For years, I had kept them as proof of motherhood and sacrifice, but now I understood. Keeping them out didn't matter anymore. I wasn't erasing memories, but I wouldn't let them bind me either. A week after the wedding, the storm I anticipated arrived, but not in the form I expected. I was having breakfast on my terrace when my phone rang. It was Richard. Margaret, I need to see you immediately. David and Rebecca have filed for a capacity evaluation hearing. My teacup nearly slipped from my hand. A what? They're claiming you're mentally incapacitated, that you suffer from paranoid delusions and need to be placed under their guardianship. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so dangerous. On what grounds? They have Dr. Thompson, the doctor Rebecca mentioned. He submitted an affidavit stating you exhibit signs of cognitive impairment and paranoia. They're claiming your behavior at the wedding was evidence of your declining mental state. Cold rage washed over me. Can they do this? They can try, Richard said grimly. And unfortunately, the system sometimes favors adult children over elderly parents regardless of the facts. I've seen cases where perfectly competent seniors lose everything because a sympathetic judge believes the children are acting in their parents' best interest. I gripped the phone tighter. What do we do? Fight, hard. I'm already preparing our response. We'll need to get your regular physician involved, maybe a neuropsychologist for evaluation. Meanwhile, document everything. Every interaction, every phone call, every text. After hanging up, I sat motionless watching a cardinal hop along the garden wall, its red feathers bright against the green ivy. The sheer audacity of their move stunned me. They had twisted my exposure of their scheme into evidence of mental instability. It was frighteningly clever. If successful, they could gain control of all my assets while painting themselves as concerned caregivers rather than exposed conspirators. I called Grace immediately. Her reaction mirrored my own outrage. "This is elder abuse, plain and simple," she said. "They're weaponizing the guardianship system. It happens more than people realize. Once they get control, they can do whatever they want with your money, your home, even decide where you live." "Silver Meadows," I whispered, remembering Rebecca's plans. "Exactly. And some of these facilities are essentially prisons for the elderly. Limited visitors, restricted phone access, heavy medication." A chill ran through me. "How do we fight this with help?" Grace said firmly. "You need allies. I know someone at the Elder Protection Alliance who specializes in these cases." That afternoon, I met Sarah Goldstein, a formidable attorney in her late 50s who specialized in elder rights. Her office walls displayed numerous awards and news clippings about cases she'd won against predatory guardianships. "What we're dealing with is a textbook case of attempted financial exploitation through the courts," she explained after reviewing my situation. "Unfortunately, it's increasingly common. The guardianship system was designed to protect vulnerable adults, but it's frequently abused by family members seeking control of assets. Can we win?" I asked simply. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Yes, but it won't be easy. These cases get ugly. They'll attack your mental capacity, your memory, your judgment. They'll twist every eccentric habit or emotional reaction into evidence of impairment." "I'm not afraid of ugly," I replied. "I built a real estate empire in a man's world. I know ugly." She smiled slightly. "Good. We'll need that backbone. First, we document your clear capacity with multiple expert evaluations. Second, we gather evidence of their plan, including your recordings. Third, we countersue for elder abuse and attempted exploitation. For the next 2 weeks, I underwent extensive evaluations with neurologists, psychologists, and cognitive specialists. Each test confirmed what I already knew: I was perfectly competent with cognitive abilities above average for my age group. Meanwhile, David and Rebecca escalated their campaign. They told family friends I was suffering from dementia. They contacted my business associates, suggesting I was no longer capable of managing my affairs. They even tried to access my medical records by claiming they were my designated caretakers. Then they crossed another line. They showed up unannounced at my home one evening, pushing past my housekeeper, Maria. "Mom, we're worried about you," David said, all concern, as they entered my living room uninvited. "We've been talking to specialists about your condition." "My condition?" I asked coolly, setting down my book. Rebecca stepped forward, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Margaret, there's no shame in cognitive decline. It happens to many people your age, but you need proper care." "And I suppose you're here to provide that care?" I asked. "We've found a wonderful place," David said eagerly. "Silver Meadows has an excellent memory care unit. They can monitor your medication, provide structured activities." "Get out," I said quietly. "Mom, be reasonable," David pleaded. "After what happened at the wedding, everyone's concerned." "Everyone?" I raised an eyebrow. "Or just the two of you worried that your plans have been exposed?" Rebecca's sympathetic mask slipped slightly. "This is exactly what the doctor mentioned. Paranoia, suspicion. Classic signs of—" "I said get out," I repeated, standing now, "or I'll call the police and report you for trespassing." "You wouldn't call the police on your own son," David said, shocked. "Try me." When they finally left, I called Sarah immediately to report the incident. She was disturbed, but not surprised. "This is typical escalation," she explained. "They'll try to provoke emotional reactions they can use as evidence, document everything." The pressure took its toll. My blood pressure rose. I developed insomnia. Some mornings I could barely force myself out of bed, knowing another battle awaited. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of legal preparation, I found myself staring at the array of pill bottles on my nightstand. Blood pressure medication prescribed after the stress began affecting my health. Sleeping pills I rarely used. Antacids for the stomach pain that now accompanied every meal. I looked at those bottles and realized David and Rebecca were still winning in a way. They were destroying my health even if they couldn't yet touch my assets. That night, I made another crucial decision. I would not let them break me physically any more than I would let them break me financially. The next morning, I called an old friend who taught yoga at the senior center. I began daily walks along the Charles River. I hired a nutritionist who specialized in stress reduction diets. Small steps, but they helped. My body was a fortress I needed to defend as fiercely as my assets. In the midst of this battle, something unexpected happened. Maria, my housekeeper of 15 years, brought me a business card one morning. "This gentleman came by yesterday when you were out, Mrs. Wilson. He said he's an art teacher at the community center. He left his card in case you're interested in classes." I looked at the simple card, Thomas Phillips Art Instruction, Boston Community Arts Center. "He said he met your friend Grace, and she mentioned you might enjoy painting," Maria added. I almost dismissed it, too focused on the legal battle ahead, but something made me tuck the card into my wallet. That weekend, feeling suffocated by legal documents and medical evaluations, I found myself driving to the address on the card. The community center was a renovated warehouse, sunlight streaming through high windows. I heard laughter and conversation before I even entered the classroom. Inside, a dozen people of various ages stood at easels, most of them my age or older. A tall man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses moved between the stations, offering guidance. He looked up as I entered, recognition in his eyes. He approached with a warm smile. "You must be Margaret. Grace mentioned you might visit. I'm Thomas." "I don't know anything about painting," I admitted. "Perfect," he replied. "Beginners have no bad habits to break. Would you like to try—" Before I knew it, I was standing at an easel brush in hand, attempting to capture the bowl of fruit arranged on a table. My first efforts were laughable, but Thomas was encouraging. "Art isn't about perfection," he said. "It's about seeing the world differently and expressing what you see." For 3 hours, I forgot about guardianship hearings and betrayals. I focused only on light and shadow color and form. When class ended, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. "Will you come back next Saturday?" Thomas asked as I prepared to leave. I surprised myself by nodding. "I think I will." 3 weeks after the wedding, the court date for the capacity hearing was set. We would appear before Judge Eleanor Martinez, known for her fairness, but also for her thoroughness in guardianship cases. The morning of the hearing, I dressed with particular care: a tailored navy suit that complemented my dark skin tone, modest pearl earrings that stood out against my complexion, low heels. Professional, dignified, competent, a black businesswoman who had succeeded in a world that often doubted women like me. When I walked into the courtroom, David and Rebecca were already seated with their attorney, William Hargrove, a man known for aggressive guardianship litigation. David couldn't meet my eyes. Rebecca stared coldly, her face a mask of false concern. As I took my seat between Richard and Sarah, I felt a surprising calm. When I entered this room, they saw me as a patient. When I left, they would see me as a warrior. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Eleanor Martinez," the bailiff called. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a severe bun, took her seat and surveyed the room. "We're here today in the matter of Wilson v. Wilson, a petition for guardianship. I've reviewed the initial filings, but I'd like to hear opening statements before we proceed to testimony." Hargrove rose first, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. "Your Honor, this case is about protecting a vulnerable elder from her own declining judgment. Margaret Wilson, once a savvy businesswoman, has been exhibiting increasing signs of paranoia and cognitive impairment. At her son's wedding, she suffered a break from reality, making wild accusations and causing a public scene. Her son and daughter-in-law are simply trying to ensure she receives proper care and that her substantial assets are protected during her decline." I clenched my jaw, but kept my face neutral. The performance was impressive in its audacity. Sarah stood next her presence, commanding, despite her small stature. "Your Honor, this case is indeed about protection, but not as Mr. Hargrove suggests. It's about protecting an independent, fully competent woman from a calculated attempt at financial exploitation by her son and his wife." Far from experiencing cognitive decline, Mrs. Wilson is the victim of a common and pernicious form of elder abuse. The wild accusations Mr. Hargrove references were in fact Mrs. Wilson exposing a scheme to defraud her of millions of dollars backed by audio evidence. This guardianship petition is nothing more than retaliation for that exposure and an attempt to gain control of her substantial assets through legal means, since their original plan failed. Judge Martinez nodded, making notes. "We'll hear from the petitioners first. Mr. Hargrove, call your first witness." Dr. Thompson took the stand, a slender man with thinning hair and practiced sincerity. He testified that he had observed me exhibiting classic signs of paranoid ideation and inappropriate emotional responses indicative of frontotemporal dementia. When asked if he had performed any standardized cognitive assessments, he admitted he had not, but insisted his clinical observations were sufficient for an initial diagnosis. Sarah's cross-examination was surgical. "Dr. Thompson, how many times did you actually meet with Mrs. Wilson?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Once briefly at a social gathering." A social gathering? Would that be the dinner at David and Rebecca's home a week before the wedding? Yes. "And during this dinner, what cognitive tests did you administer?" "As I said, I relied on observation." "So no actual tests, just watching her at dinner." "Tell me, doctor, do you often diagnose complex neurological conditions based on dinner party observations?" "Objection, badgering the witness," Hargrove called out. "Sustained," Judge Martinez said, but her expression had changed, skepticism evident. Sarah continued. "Dr. Thompson, what is your relationship with Silver Meadows Assisted Living Facility?" He cleared his throat. "I consult for them occasionally." "Occasionally, aren't you their medical director with a financial stake in the facility?" "I hold a minor ownership interest, yes." And isn't it true that Rebecca Wilson specifically discussed placing her mother-in-law in Silver Meadows should she gain guardianship? Dr. Thompson paled. I wouldn't know about that. Sarah produced an email. Your Honor, I'd like to enter this communication between Dr. Thompson and Rebecca Wilson into evidence. It discusses, and I quote, the significant financial benefits of transitioning Margaret to Silver Meadows under a structured guardianship arrangement. The courtroom stirred. Judge Martinez frowned deeply as she reviewed the document. Dr. Thompson, did you receive compensation from either of the petitioners prior to writing your affidavit about Mrs. Wilson's mental state? He hesitated too long. I provided a professional opinion. That wasn't my question. Were you paid? After another uncomfortable pause, he admitted, I received a consulting fee. By lunchtime, the tide had begun to turn. David took the stand next, attempting to paint a picture of a mother whose behavior had become increasingly erratic. He described finding me confused about dates, forgetting conversations, becoming suspicious of neighbors. I only want what's best for her. He insisted, a perfect picture of filial concern. During cross-examination, Sarah was relentless. Mr. Wilson, you claim your mother has become confused about finances, yet her company has increased profits by 18% in the past year under her direct management. How do you explain this success if she's cognitively impaired? David had no answer. Let's talk about the recording your mother played at your wedding. Was that your voice on the recording discussing taking her money and starting a new life with someone named Vanessa? David flushed. It was taken out of context. Please explain the proper context for planning to take your mother's money and abandon your new bride. When Rebecca took the stand in the afternoon, her performance was polished but increasingly desperate. She described my paranoid accusations and irrational behavior, suggesting she and David only wanted me to get proper medical care. Sarah's approach changed slightly. Mrs. Wilson, before the wedding, did you enter Margaret Wilson's bedroom while she was sleeping and shave her head without her consent? Rebecca's eyes widened. That's absurd. Why would I do something so cruel? Sarah produced the note. Is this your handwriting? Rebecca examined it. It looks similar, but anyone could have written this. We have a handwriting expert prepared to testify it matches your writing exactly. Would you like to reconsider your answer? Rebecca's composure cracked. You don't understand. She was going to ruin everything. She's always been controlling, always thinking David belongs to her alone. The admission hung in the air. Judge Martinez leaned forward. Mrs. Wilson, are you admitting to assaulting your mother-in-law in her sleep? Rebecca realized her mistake too late. No, that's not what I meant. By late afternoon, it was my turn. As I took the stand, I felt the weight of every eye in the courtroom. I had prepared for this moment, understanding that my composure, clarity, and competence would speak more loudly than any testimony. I answered questions about my business, my health, my daily activities with precision and confidence. I explained the events leading up to the wedding with neither emotional excess nor detachment. When Sarah asked about the recordings, I stated simply, I did what any business person would do when suspecting fraud. I gathered evidence. During Hargrove's cross-examination, he tried repeatedly to provoke an emotional response to trip me up on dates or details, to paint my actions as paranoid and vindictive. I remained steady, correcting him politely when he mischaracterized events, acknowledging my emotions without allowing them to overwhelm me. When he asked pointedly if I was punishing my son for disappointing me, I looked directly at David for the first time that day. I raised my son to understand that actions have consequences. I'm not punishing him. I'm allowing him to experience the natural outcome of his choices. The final blow came when Sarah called her surprise witness. A young woman with dark hair entered the courtroom, visibly nervous. Please state your name for the record, Sarah requested. Vanessa Park. David went rigid. Rebecca's head snapped toward him, eyes wide with shock. Vanessa Park was not just David's mistress. She was Rebecca's former college roommate, someone she had once considered a close friend. The betrayal cut deeper than anyone in the courtroom could have imagined. Vanessa testified that she had been having an affair with David for over a year, beginning shortly after he and Rebecca became engaged. She described in detail how David had complained about Rebecca's materialism and social climbing, while simultaneously planning to use the marriage as a means to access my wealth. He said once he had his mother's millions, we could go anywhere, do anything. He told me the marriage to Rebecca was just for show to keep his mother happy until he got the money. As Vanessa continued, she revealed that David had promised to divorce Rebecca within a year of their marriage once he had secured the wedding gift and liquidated as many assets as possible. He said Rebecca was just as calculating as he was, that they deserved each other but neither deserved to be poor. Rebecca's face transformed from shock to fury as the depth of the double betrayal became clear. She turned on David, hissing accusations that the bailiff had to quiet. By the time closing arguments began, the outcome seemed clear. Judge Martinez listened to both sides, then delivered her ruling with unmistakable conviction. This court finds no evidence whatsoever of cognitive impairment or incapacity in Margaret Wilson. What I do find is substantial evidence of an attempted financial exploitation scheme, followed by a retaliatory attempt to abuse the guardianship system. She turned her gaze to David and Rebecca. The petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges related to elder abuse, attempted fraud, and perjury. I am also issuing a temporary restraining order, preventing either petitioner from contacting Mrs. Wilson without her explicit consent through counsel. The gavel fell with finality. I exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't joy I felt, or even vindication. It was something quieter, the piece of truth recognized. As we gathered our papers to leave, David approached, his face haggard. Rebecca had already stormed out their marriage, likely another casualty of the day's revelations. "Mom," he began, his voice breaking. I held up my hand. "Not here, David. Not now." "Please," he whispered. "I've lost everything." I looked at my son, this man I had raised and loved, now reduced to desperate pleading. The anger that had fueled me for weeks was fading, leaving behind a hollow sadness. "You haven't lost everything," I said quietly. "You've lost what you tried to take. There's a difference." I turned away, leaving him standing alone in the emptying courtroom. As Sarah and Richard escorted me out, reporters called questions from the courthouse steps. We declined comment, moving swiftly to the waiting car. "What now?" I asked Sarah as we drove away. "Now you rebuild," she said simply. "You're free to live your life without this hanging over you. The restraining order gives you space to decide what relationship, if any, you want with your son going forward." That evening, alone in my house, I poured a glass of wine and sat in the garden watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The victory felt hollow in some ways. I had won, but at what cost? The son I loved was revealed as someone I hardly knew. The family I had sacrificed everything for was shattered beyond repair. Yet beneath the sadness, a small spark glowed. For the first time in decades, I was truly free. Free from manipulation, free from the weight of endless giving, free from the desperate need to buy love with sacrifice. Tomorrow would be the first day of a life I had never dared imagine. I raised my glass to the darkening sky. To new beginnings. I whispered to the evening stars, however late they come. The next morning, I called Thomas Phillips at the Community Arts Center. "I'd like to sign up for regular lessons," I told him, "not just the Saturday class." "Wonderful," he replied warmly. "We have sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays as well." "Perfect," I said. "I'll take all three." Over the next few weeks, I immersed myself in learning to paint. The controlled movement of brush on canvas became a form of meditation, a way to process all that had happened. I started with simple still lifes, but Thomas encouraged me to try landscapes. "The ocean is just 20 minutes away," he suggested. "There's something healing about painting water." He was right. I began taking my easel to a quiet stretch of shoreline north of the city. The rhythm of the waves, the ever-changing light, the vast horizon line that seemed to promise unlimited possibilities, all spoke to something deep within me. One bright Tuesday, I was struggling with capturing the way sunlight glinted on the water when Thomas appeared beside my easel. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to my palette. I nodded, and he demonstrated a technique for creating the illusion of light dancing on water. His movements were sure the result of decades of practice. When he handed the brush back, our fingers touched briefly. "I come here often myself," he said, looking out at the sea. "After my wife died 5 years ago, painting this view kept me sane." I looked at him with new understanding. "How long were you married?" 42 years, he said softly. "Cancer took her in just 6 months. Felt like I lost half of myself." I nodded, recognizing the raw grief in his voice. "I lost Robert 35 years ago. Heart attack. Sudden." "Different and yet the same," Thomas mused. "The hole they leave behind." We painted in comfortable silence after that, two people who understood loss without needing to explain it. When we packed up our supplies as the sun began to set, Thomas hesitated. "There's a small seafood place just up the road. Nothing fancy, but they make a good clam chowder. Would you like to join me for dinner?" I surprised myself by accepting immediately. The restaurant was indeed simple, a weathered building with views of the harbor. Over steaming bowls of chowder, our conversation flowed easily. Thomas told me about his career as a structural engineer designing bridges and buildings across New England. I shared stories of my early days in real estate, the challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated field. "It's remarkable what you built," he said, "especially as a single mother." "Necessity is a powerful motivator," I replied. "When failure means your child goes hungry, you find a way to succeed." "And now," he asked gently, "what motivates you now that the legal battle is over?" I considered the question seriously. "I'm not entirely sure yet. For so long, everything was about providing for David, building security for both of us. Then it became about protecting myself from him. Now I need to figure out who Margaret Wilson is when she's not defined by being someone's mother or someone's victim." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "That's a journey worth taking." As he walked me to my car, he added, "You know we're having a small exhibit of student work next month. You should consider submitting something." "I've only been painting a few weeks," I protested. "Art isn't always about technical perfection," he said. "Sometimes it's about the raw truth of expression. And you, Margaret Wilson, have a powerful truth to express." I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had in months. The thought of creating something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal was strangely appealing. The next morning, I began a new canvas, larger than any I'd attempted before. It would become Woman by the Sea, my first serious artistic effort. Spring arrived in Boston with a flourish of cherry blossoms and soft rain. I stood before a blank canvas in the sunlit community center brush, poised, listening to Thomas explain a technique for capturing light and shadow. 3 months had passed since the courthouse victory, 3 months of healing and discovery. "Remember," Thomas said, his voice gentle as he addressed our small class, "painting isn't about perfection. It's about seeing the world as it truly is, then having the courage to show others what you see." I smiled to myself, thinking how those words applied to more than just art. Seeing the world as it truly is, seeing people as they truly are, had been my hardest lesson. And showing others that truth had required more courage than building my entire real estate empire. My life had taken on a new rhythm since the courtroom confrontation. Mornings were for business. I still managed my properties, though I delegated more to trusted associates. Afternoons often found me at the shore with an easel or here at the community center, learning to transfer what I saw and felt onto canvas. The restraining order against David and Rebecca remained in effect. According to Richard, they had separated shortly after the court case. Rebecca had returned to her parents' home in Connecticut. David had moved to a small apartment downtown, the last of his savings apparently dwindling. The fallout from the wedding and court case had been extensive. Rebecca's family, humiliated by the public exposure, had distanced themselves from their daughter. Her father, the bank executive who had given that proud toast at the reception, had reportedly told colleagues that he no longer recognized the woman he'd raised. Their family's carefully maintained social standing had suffered a blow from which it might never fully recover. As for Vanessa, she had moved to Seattle wanting to escape the gossip and recrimination that had followed her testimony. Before leaving, she had sent me a letter apologizing for her role in David's deception, explaining that she had truly believed his claims that I was controlling and manipulative. Only when she saw Rebecca's cruelty and David's calculated greed firsthand did she realize she had been misled. I tried not to dwell on thoughts of my son. The pain had dulled from sharp anguish to a persistent ache. I didn't hate him. I pitied him. He'd chosen a path of easy deception over honest work, and now he was facing the consequences. "Margaret, that's coming along beautifully," Thomas said, stopping beside my easel. I'd been working on a seascape trying to capture the moment when waves break against rocks. "I'm struggling with the foam," I admitted. "It looks flat." Thomas stood close, the scent of his cedar cologne subtle but pleasant. "Try using a dry brush technique here," he suggested, demonstrating with quick, light strokes. "Let the texture of the canvas do some of the work." I followed his example, and the waves suddenly seemed to leap from the painting, alive with movement. "You have a natural eye," he said, his voice warm with approval. "I had a good teacher," I replied, meeting his gaze. A comfortable silence settled between us, broken only when another student called for his assistance. As he moved away, I found myself watching him, the confident way he carried himself, the patience in his explanations, the genuine joy he took in his students' progress. At 68, I'd never expected to feel this quickening of interest again, this quiet curiosity about another person. Thomas, a kind African-American man, whose silver hair contrasted handsomely with his deep brown skin, seemed to understand the unique journey I'd traveled as a black woman, building success in Boston's competitive real estate world. "Don't forget," Thomas announced as class ended, "the community exhibition is 2 weeks from Saturday. Anyone interested in showing their work should let me know by next Tuesday." As students packed up their supplies, Thomas approached me again. "Will you be submitting something, Margaret?" I hesitated. "I've only been painting for a few months. Everyone else has years of experience." "Art isn't a competition," he said. "It's about sharing your unique perspective, and yours is worth sharing." I considered his words. "I'll think about it." "Good," he nodded. "And perhaps you'd consider joining me for dinner again. There's a new Italian place on Waterfront Drive I've been wanting to try." The invitation hung in the air between us, casual, yet weighted with potential. I found myself smiling. "I'd like that, Thomas." We agreed to meet that Friday evening. As I drove home, I felt an unfamiliar lightness in my chest, a sensation I eventually recognized as anticipation. When Friday arrived, I spent more time than usual considering my appearance. I chose a deep blue dress I'd purchased years ago, but rarely worn pearl earrings that had been a gift from Robert, and a light cashmere wrap for the evening chill. I applied makeup with care, embracing rather than trying to hide the lines that life had etched around my eyes and mouth. They were evidence of a life fully lived with all its joys and sorrows. The restaurant overlooked Boston Harbor, white tablecloths gleaming in candlelight, soft music playing. Thomas was waiting at the entrance, dressed in a charcoal suit that complemented his tall frame. His smile when he saw me carried genuine pleasure. "Margaret, you look lovely," he said, offering his arm as we followed the host to our table. "Thank you," I replied, surprised at how natural it felt to accept both the compliment and the gesture. Over antipasto and wine, conversation flowed easily. We discovered shared tastes in music and literature, similar views on politics, and a mutual love of travel, though neither of us had done as much as we'd hoped. "I always planned to see Europe properly after retirement," Thomas explained. "Louise and I had a whole itinerary mapped out: Paris, Florence, Vienna, but then she got sick, and afterward, the desire to go disappeared." I finished understanding completely. He nodded. "What about you?" "Any places you've dreamed of seeing." "The Greek islands," I admitted. I have this image of white buildings against blue sea, simplicity and beauty in perfect balance." "You should go," he said. "Nothing's stopping you now." The simple truth of his statement struck me forcefully. He was right. For the first time in decades, I answered to no one. My business ran smoothly. My legal troubles were behind me. My son was no longer my responsibility. I was free to reimagine my life completely. "Perhaps I will," I said thoughtfully, though I admit I've never traveled alone. "Neither have I," Thomas replied. "Maybe that's why we both keep putting it off." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Neither of us was ready to acknowledge it directly, but the possibility had been introduced. Two people no longer young, but not yet old, considering sharing new experiences. As the evening progressed, I found myself laughing more than I had in years. Thomas had a gentle wit and a gift for storytelling. He told me about growing up in Western Massachusetts, about engineering disasters that had taught him humility, about the joy he'd found in teaching art after a career of concrete and steel. "Building bridges satisfied my mind," he explained, "but painting feeds my soul." When the check came, Thomas reached for it, but I placed my hand over his. "Please let me. You've given me so much already, a new way of seeing a creative outlet when I needed it most." He smiled. "Next time, then." The promise of next time warmed me as we walked along the harbor afterward, the city lights reflecting on dark water. We strolled in comfortable silence, occasionally commenting on a passing boat or an interesting building. When his hand lightly touched mine, I didn't pull away. Our fingers entwined naturally, as if they'd been waiting for this moment. At my car, Thomas hesitated. "I've enjoyed this evening very much, Margaret." "So have I," I replied honestly. He leaned forward slowly, giving me time to withdraw if I wished. I didn't. His lips met mine in a gentle kiss, brief but full of warmth. When he pulled back, I saw uncertainty in his eyes, not regret, but a question. "Too soon?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "No, just unexpected. In a good way." His smile returned. "I'll see you at class on Tuesday." "I'll be there," I promised. Driving home, I felt both exhilarated and slightly foolish. At my age, experiencing the flutter of attraction seemed almost comical. Yet it was undeniably there, a spark of connection I'd thought long extinguished. The next morning, I made a decision. I would submit my painting, Woman by the Sea, for the exhibition. The piece depicted a silver-haired woman standing on a rocky shore facing the ocean's vastness, with straight shoulders and lifted chin. I'd painted her from behind her face, not visible, but her posture conveying a quiet strength. In the distance, storm clouds were breaking apart, allowing sunlight to pierce through in golden rays. The painting was rough in places, lacking the technical finesse of more experienced artists. But it carried emotional truth, my truth. It was my statement about standing firm after the storm, about facing the unknown with courage rather than fear. I was hanging my latest seascape on the living room wall 2 days later when the doorbell rang. Maria answered it, then appeared in the doorway with an odd expression. "Mrs. Wilson, it's your son." My hands stilled on the frame. "David is here." She nodded. "I told him you might not want visitors, but he insists it's important." I took a deep breath, weighing my options. The restraining order allowed me to call the police immediately, but something in Maria's expression gave me pause. "He seems different," she said quietly. Sober, respectful. Curiosity overcame caution. "Show him to the garden terrace. I'll speak to him there." I took a moment to compose myself before stepping outside. The spring air was cool but pleasant, the garden in full bloom. David stood with his back to me, looking out at the carefully tended roses and hydrangeas. He turned at the sound of the door. I almost didn't recognize him. The polished appearance he'd always maintained was gone. His hair needed cutting, his face was thinner, and he wore simple jeans and a button-down shirt rather than his usual designer clothes. Most striking was his expression. The entitled confidence had vanished, replaced by a wary humility I'd never seen in him before. "Mom," he said quietly, making no move to approach me. "Thank you for seeing me." I maintained a careful distance. The restraining order is still in effect, David. You shouldn't be here. I know. I'll leave if you want me to. He gestured to a manila envelope on the table. I just wanted to give you this in person. What is it? Legal documents. I've dropped all appeals in the case. I've signed statements acknowledging that I lied under oath and that you were never incapacitated. Your lawyer has copies, but I wanted you to have these directly from me. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. I found none. Why now? I asked. David sighed deeply. Because I've been doing a lot of thinking, and because I owe you more than I can ever repay. He paused, seeming to gather himself. Rebecca and I are divorced. She took what little I had left in the settlement. I lost my job when clients heard about the court case. I've been struggling. I see, I said, my voice neutral. And you've come for money. His head snapped up, pain flashing across his features. No, God, no, that's not why I'm here. I wouldn't ask you for a penny after what I did. The vehemence in his tone surprised me. Then why? To apologize. To try to explain, not that there's any explanation that could justify my actions. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that my heart twisted unexpectedly. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I did what I did. Why I was willing to hurt the one person who's always been there for me. I said nothing, waiting. She says I've spent my life trying to fill the hole Dad's death left, that I've been using money, status, possessions to try to feel secure, but it never worked, so I just kept needing more. He gave a bitter laugh. Turns out I've been treating you like a bank because I never dealt with losing him. I moved to the chair farthest from him and sat down. That might explain your sense of entitlement to my money, David. It doesn't explain the cruelty, the lies, the attempt to have me declared incompetent. He nodded, accepting the rebuke. The competency hearing was Rebecca's idea initially, but I went along with it. I told myself it was for your own good that you were becoming paranoid. But deep down, I knew it was just another way to get control of your assets. He swallowed hard. There's no excuse. What I did was unforgivable. Yes, I agreed quietly. It was. He looked down at his hands. I don't expect forgiveness, Mom. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know I'm trying to change. I found a job waiting tables. It's the first honest work I've done in years, maybe ever. I'm seeing a therapist weekly. I'm facing who I really am, not who I pretended to be. I studied my son, this stranger who wore David's face, but spoke with a humility I'd never heard from him before. Was this another performance, another manipulation, or was this genuine remorse? Why should I believe you now? I asked. You've become quite skilled at playing whatever role serves your interests. He winced at the accuracy of the observation. You shouldn't believe me. I haven't earned that. Words mean nothing after what I did. He gestured to the envelope again. That's why I brought this. It's the only concrete evidence I can offer that I'm trying to make amends. I made no move to take it. What do you want from me, David? Nothing, he said quietly. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did, that I take full responsibility, and that I'm trying to become someone better, someone worthy of being your son again someday. He stood preparing to leave. I won't contact you again unless you want me to. As he turned to go, I noticed something I'd missed earlier, a small paint stain on his sleeve, blue against the white cotton. You're painting? I asked the question, slipping out before I could stop it. He paused, seeming surprised by my interest. Yes, I started a few weeks ago, at the community center downtown, Tuesday evenings. A faint smile touched his lips. I'm terrible at it, but it helps somehow. The coincidence struck me with unexpected force. Tuesday evenings. The same community center where I took classes, but a different session. Had Thomas seen him there, known who he was? The questions must have shown on my face. I didn't know you were taking classes there, David said quickly. I can find somewhere else if it makes you uncomfortable. I waved the concern away. The center is open to everyone. An awkward silence fell between us. After a moment, David nodded and turned again to leave. David, I said, stopping him, I can't forgive yet. I don't know if I ever can completely, but I hear what you're saying. He nodded, accepting this limited response as more than he deserved. Thank you for listening, Mom. I watched him walk away, his shoulders bent slightly as if carrying a weight. When he reached his car, an old Honda, not the luxury vehicle he'd once driven, he turned back, once raised his hand in a hesitant wave, then drove away. I remained in the garden a long time afterward, thinking about forgiveness and second chances, about patterns broken and new paths taken. Eventually, I picked up the envelope he'd left. The documents inside were exactly as he'd described, legal acknowledgments of his deception signed and notarized. That evening, I called Thomas. "Did you know my son takes painting classes at the center?" I asked without preamble. A pause. "Yes. He started about a month ago." "Why didn't you mention it?" "I wasn't sure how you'd feel about it," Thomas admitted. "And it wasn't my place to intrude on your family situation. The classes are on different days. I didn't think you'd ever encounter each other there." I considered this, finding his reasoning sound. "Has he spoken to you about me?" "No. He registered under his father's last name, not Wilson. I only realized who he was when I overheard another instructor mention his full name. By then, he'd been coming to classes for a couple of weeks. What's he like there?" The question came from some maternal part of me I thought had died during the court battle. Thomas seemed to choose his words carefully. Quiet, focused. He keeps to himself mostly, struggles with the basics but works hard. A pause. "He reminds me a little of you, actually." The comparison startled me. Of me? The intensity, the way he stares at a problem determined to solve it. I had never considered that David might have inherited anything of value from me. I'd always seen only his father in him, Robert's charm, Robert's easy confidence. The thought that some core quality of mine might live on in my son, despite everything, stirred complicated emotions. "He came to see me today," I told Thomas, "to apologize." "How do you feel about that?" "Confused, wary. A small part of me wants to believe he's genuinely changed. The rest remembers how convincing he can be when he wants something." "Trust takes time to rebuild," Thomas said gently, "especially after it's been so thoroughly broken." "If it can be rebuilt at all," I added. "That's something only you can decide, Margaret." After we hung up, I found myself drawn to the family photo albums I'd packed away months ago. I pulled one out, opening to images of David as a child, his first day of school, baseball games, birthday parties. In one photo, he sat on Robert's shoulders, both of them laughing at the camera. In another, a 10-year-old David proudly displayed a science fair ribbon. When had that bright, loving boy become the calculating man who would try to steal my dignity along with my money? Had it been a sudden transformation or a slow erosion of character, I'd been too busy to notice. Had my own actions, my focus on providing material security, my equating love with financial support contributed to his distorted values? I had no answers, only questions that haunted me through a restless night. The morning of the exhibition arrived 2 weeks later. I delivered my painting to the community center where Thomas and several volunteers were arranging the display. About 30 works would be shown, ranging from still lifes and portraits to abstracts and landscapes. Mine was assigned a spot near the center of the main wall. "It looks right at home there," Thomas commented, standing beside me as we surveyed the arrangement. "Among real artists, you mean?" I smiled to soften the self-criticism. He shook his head. "You are a real artist, Margaret. Perhaps not by training or experience yet, but by vision. That's what matters most." The exhibition opened at 7 that evening. I arrived early, suddenly nervous about having my work on public display. Thomas greeted me at the door, handsome in a navy blazer. "Ready for your debut?" he asked, offering a glass of wine. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, taking a fortifying sip. The center filled gradually with artists, their friends and families and community members. I was speaking with a retired doctor about his series of bird paintings when I felt a presence behind me. Turning, I found David standing there, uncertainty written across his features. "I saw the exhibition announcement at class," he explained quickly. I didn't realize you were showing your work. I can leave if you'd prefer." Before I could respond, Thomas appeared at my side. "David, glad you could make it. Have you seen the main gallery yet?" The easy way Thomas navigated the awkward moment gave me time to collect myself. "It's a public event," I said finally. "You have as much right to be here as anyone." Relief flashed across David's face. "Thank you." An uncomfortable silence fell. Thomas broke it with characteristic grace. "David, would you excuse us? I need to borrow your mother for a moment. The director wants to meet the artist behind Woman by the Sea." As Thomas guided me away, I whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" Intervening before I had to decide between polite conversation and walking away. He smiled. "I thought you might appreciate a moment to regroup." The director's interest in my painting was genuine. She asked about my inspiration, my technique, how long I'd been creating art. I answered as best I could, still distracted by David's presence. Throughout the evening, I was aware of him moving through the exhibition, spending time with each painting, occasionally speaking with other visitors. He kept a respectful distance from me, our paths crossing only when I stood beside my painting, explaining it to a retired English professor. "The woman seems to be at a crossroads," the professor observed, "leaving something behind, facing something new." "Yes," I agreed. "That's exactly right." "It's beautiful, Mom." David's voice startled me. I hadn't noticed him approach. The professor, sensing the tension, discreetly moved away. "Thank you," I said stiffly. David studied the painting, his expression thoughtful. "Is that you facing the ocean?" I nodded. "The storm is breaking up," he noted, pointing to the clouds. "But not gone completely." "No," I agreed. "Not completely." He seemed to understand the double meaning. "I should go. I just wanted to say your work is powerful. I'm glad I got to see it." As he turned to leave, something compelled me to speak. "David." He paused, looking back with cautious hope. "There's a coffee shop across the street. I sometimes stop there after class. Tuesdays around 8:30. His eyes widened slightly at what I was offering, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a small opening, a possibility. "I know the place," he said quietly. "Good," I replied and turned back to my painting. The exhibition was deemed a success. 2 of my smaller works sold, surprising me completely. As the evening wound down, Thomas found me again. "Would you like to celebrate with dinner?" he asked. "There's a little place around the corner that stays open late." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had all evening. "I'd like that very much." Over pasta and wine, we talked about the exhibition, the visitors, the unexpected sales of my work. "So, are you an artist now?" Thomas teased gently. "Hardly." I laughed. "But I've discovered something I truly enjoy, something that's just for me." "That's worth celebrating in itself," he said, raising his glass. As we lingered over coffee, Thomas reached across the table and took my hand. "I've been thinking about what you said about the Greek islands." "Oh." My pulse quickened slightly. "I've never seen them either. White buildings against blue sea sounds perfect." He hesitated. "Would you consider going with me? Perhaps in the fall when it's less crowded." The invitation took my breath away. Not a casual dinner, not a local exhibition, but a journey together, a shared adventure. "I'd need to think about it," I said honestly. "Of course," he replied, no pressure in his tone. "It's just something to consider." Later at my door, he kissed me goodnight more confidently than before. I allowed myself to respond, to enjoy the simple pleasure of connection. "Good night, Margaret," he said softly. "I'll see you on Tuesday." "Good night, Thomas." Inside, I moved through the quiet house, turning off lights, my mind full of the evening's events. I paused before one of my paintings, a sunrise over the ocean. Hope captured in colors. Life rarely unfolds as we expect. At 68, I had faced betrayal by those I trusted most, fought for my independence, discovered an artistic talent I never knew I possessed, and opened myself to the possibility of new love. I had drawn boundaries where needed and created openings where possible. Standing there in the soft lamplight, I felt neither young nor old, but ageless. a woman at the threshold of a life I was creating brushstroke by brushstroke, choice by choice. I thought of the painting that had sold that evening, New Horizons, I'd called it. It showed a path winding toward distant mountains, the journey clearly challenging, but the destination bathed in golden light. That's what lay before me now. Not an ending, but a horizon. Not a conclusion, but a continuation. The past with its pain would always be part of me, but it no longer defined me. The future with all its uncertainty and promise beckoned, and I was ready to answer its call. Have you ever discovered an unexpected talent or passion later in life? How did it change your perspective?